Hey everyone. Today, Ivy dug up an incredibly appealing story about a special being in the werewolf world, a runt named Jade. She's been surviving alone in the wild, cautiously dodging dangers. Yet, when she musters the courage to enter a new werewolf settlement, she catches a unique scent, the potential smell of her true mate, who might be a pack elite. With such a huge disparity, how will Jade choose and what sparks will fly? Watch with me to find out. Chapter 8. We approached the pack house, its imposing double doors looming ahead. My heart raced with a mixture of anticipation and dread as we made our way up the main walkway. As a rogue werewolf and a runt, I, Jade, couldn't shake the fear of rejection that had plagued me for so long. The prospect of meeting Luna, the pack leader, filled me with nervous energy. My mind raced with worst-case scenarios being turned away once more, left to fend for myself in unfamiliar territory without the resources I'd carefully accumulated at my previous location. The gentle breeze carried the sweet scents of lilacs and jasmine, but there was something else, an unfamiliar undertone that caught my attention. I inhaled deeply, trying to place the mysterious aroma. It reminded me of the rich, earthy smell of the forest's deepest recesses on cool nights, a scent that seemed to demand my focus. My keen observational skills, honed by years of survival, kicked into overdrive as I processed this new information. Suddenly, realization struck me like a bolt of lightning. I froze in my tracks, my eyes fixed on the door ahead in utter disbelief. The implications of what I'd just discovered sent waves of unease and worry coursing through my body. My abrupt halt startled the four others walking with me, including Andy, whose caring nature immediately picked up on my distress. "Jade, is something wrong?" Andy asked, his voice laced with concern. I couldn't tear my gaze away from the closed doors as my mind whirled with the shocking revelation. My voice quivered slightly as I confessed my deepest fear, one that had haunted me for as long as I could remember. "I can smell my mate, and am scared that he will reject me. I don't think I could take that kind of pain." The words felt heavy as they left my lips, laden with the weight of my insecurities. As a runt, I knew the odds were stacked against me. Werewolves were proud creatures, and the thought of being paired with a weak runt was often seen as a blow to both personal and family pride. I'd heard countless stories of runts being rejected by their mates, their hearts shattered and souls scarred for life. The pain of rejection was said to be so excruciating that it drove many to suicide or reduced them to feral states. The thought of experiencing such agony myself was almost too much to bear. As we stood there, an unidentified mate's presence looming just beyond those doors, I couldn't help but feel that my entire future hung in the balance. Would he accept me despite my perceived shortcomings? Or would I become another tragic tale of rejection? The uncertainty was paralyzing, and I found myself longing for the relative safety of my solitary existence in the wilderness. The four looked absolutely stunned, probably never imagining that my mate might be in their pack. I was highly tempted to run for the hills as opposed to risking such pain, but the temptation of finding my soul's other half kept my feet from moving. That tiny bubble of hope kept me from fleeing, at least for the moment. The scent was mesmerizing, although, until I actually looked my mate in the eyes. It was possible for me to turn around and leave to avoid the pain of rejection. I glanced at the four around me, checking their reactions. All four had a vacant look to their eyes, indicating that there was an intense mind-linked discussion occurring. I could sense movement inside the house as three of the people were heading out the back door, while the rest gathered in a large room not far from the front door. Bruce turned to me, meeting my eyes as he said, "I mind-linked the people inside. There are several who don't have a mate yet. Anyone with possible thoughts about rejecting you have left the house through a different exit. The rest are waiting eagerly. They do know you are a runt and are currently a rogue, and it doesn't bother any of them." I examined his expression carefully. He was telling the truth and had likely closely questioned each eligible wolf inside. He was close enough to me that I could also tell he was irritated or unhappy with those who had left. I nodded and looked at the doors with trepidation. That doorway was a crossroad. If I'd passed the threshold and met my mate, there were two possibilities. One path led to a potentially happy mate bond filled with love. The other path was rejection that would leave me crippled. Rejection was rare, but not unheard of. It mostly occurred to those who were rogues, ongeza, or runts. The average werewolf would have flown through that door to find their other half once they caught the scent. As a runt, I had a huge chance of getting rejected. Thankfully, those odds were down due to Bruce's intervention. It was the only reason I took a slow and cautious step towards the front door. The formation of the mate bond required eye contact, and until I was sure that I was not about to be rejected, I was going to be watching my feet. I was going to approach this situation carefully and use plenty of caution. I slowly walked forward and dropped my eyes down to the ground as Terry opened the door. I was very nervous, and they wouldn't undoubtedly be able to see it. The alluring scent was stronger in here, and it made it hard to concentrate. I hesitantly followed Terry and Andy as they led the way. Bruce and Phil took up the rear, possibly to keep me from bolting in fear. I shook my head to try and clear it, but it didn't work. My omega senses weren't working properly, and it made me even more uneasy. All I could sense was that coal. It had started glowing once I had entered the house, and it was overwhelming any other information my senses might have given me. I couldn't sense anything else. The now smoldering coal must be my mate. Our proximity was slowly rousing the potential mate bond from dormancy. He was around the corner. I could hear whispering. Although none of the voices belonged to my mate, they lacked the pull that his voice would hold. "Hey, Eric. Smell anything yet?" "No, just the 4 guys in a forest. Why smell?" "Nothing overpowering." "Yeah, me neither. We will have to ask her later on how she cloaked her scent like that, though. That is so cool." I nervously followed Terry and Andy as we rounded the bend, ensuring that I kept my eyes down. It was hard. My rogue instincts made me want to look around to evaluate the situation and find possible escape routes, since I knew that there were over a dozen people in the room. The smell was driving me crazy. I wondered what someone would look like with that kind of scent. Nothing could ever beat it. I loved that smell. Silence reigned as I entered the room. I felt the coal glow brighter, like a fanned ember. A few moments later, I heard a set of heavy footsteps slowly begin to approach me. I heard a couple of them inhale in shock. One of the earlier voices murmured, "You have got to be kidding me." I stopped where I was and shifted my weight uneasily at that comment. My presence had not surprised them. They were shocked by the identity of whoever was walking towards me. It made me very nervous, to say the least. My worry and caution made me want to look up to see what had them so astonished, but my mind knew that I would almost certainly make eye contact, and the risk of rejection was not easily dispelled. I kept my eyes down as I sensed my mate approach me in silence. I trembled slightly with nerves and fear as he drew near. My reading ability was unable to pick anything up from him to explain why the others were shocked. The glow of the coal in my mind was far too strong. As it flickered with tiny flares of fire, it completely overwhelmed everything else in my senses. A pair of heavy boots entered my view as he stood right in front of me. The boots looked as if they had seen hard use. A deep voice spoke softly. "Will you raise your eyes?" The voice gave me goosebumps. He was definitely my mate. My long-held fears were not so easily silenced, though. My voice shook as I quietly responded, "Are you sure you won't reject me? If you aren't sure, I can leave to give you more time." I trailed off. I didn't want to leave. I would miss that intoxicating scent, and his voice would haunt my dreams despite only hearing it once. I saw a large hand slowly enter my view. His hands had calluses that showed he was no stranger to hard work. His hands slowly moved until the fingers gently touched the bottom of my chin. Sparks exploded from his touch as he slowly lifted my face up. My green eyes met his amber ones, and time stood still. My senses were flattened as the flickering coal burst into an intense flame. I felt a powerful, blinding wave of energy cascade through my senses and body as the mate bond took root in my heart and mind. Sensations and feelings I couldn't even name flooded my mind before settling. Sparks flared up once more as he gently brushed his thumb across my cheek. His eyes held nothing but love. He gazed down at me with a soft smile. "I will never reject you, Both the forming mate bond and my slowly recovering omega senses assured me that he told the truth. My fear of rejection finally dissipated like morning mist under the rising sun. Chapter 9. I slowly sipped my tea as I glanced at my mate, who was sitting beside me on the bench at the table. He was adding cream to his coffee, but I could tell that he was keeping most of his attention on me despite watching the cream pour into his cup. The others were still recovering from their shock. My omega senses had mostly recovered from the battering of the mate bond, but it still had a ways to go to reach its former level of ability. He looked at me with his amber eyes, and a smile grew on his lips. He said, "By the way, my name is William, although everyone calls me Will." His presence and scent had me relaxed in a way that I would not have thought possible. I grinned at him, completely at ease in his presence. "I'm Jade, although you probably know that already." His silent grin showed that it was not news to him. Luna shook her head in faint disbelief, although she was happy for us. She said, "It never even crossed my mind that your mate could have been Will." Luna, Emily, had decided that we should all grab a cup of tea or coffee while they tried to get over their shock. Will was an enforcer, and the chances of an enforcer finding their mate was almost as low as a runt's odds of finding theirs. Will put an arm across my shoulders and pulled me gently towards him until I leaned against his side. The sparks were gentle and welcome. The burning coal in my senses was no longer overpowering my omega abilities. It was still the strongest presence in my senses, although I could tune it out if I tried. "I know what you mean, Emily," he said, his arm still around my shoulders, and he showed no signs of letting me go anytime soon. I didn't expect it either. I was so stunned that it took me a few moments to go to her. I glanced up at my mate. He'd dwarfed my size, even in human form. I was slender and barely stood over 5 feet tall, while he was well over 6 feet and heavily built. In that fashion, he was a typical enforcer, larger and stronger than most werewolves. I could not figure out how an elite fighter got paired with a runt. It simply defied logic. I had the strangest urge to run my hand through his short dark brown hair. The mate bond was apparently playing havoc with my usual thought processes, and I was beginning to understand why newly found mates acted so infatuated. Emily watched us with a grin on her face as she said, well, you might as well give her a tour of the place once she finishes her tea. The Alpha will be back tomorrow and will probably perform the acceptance ritual at that point." One of the guys who I hadn't been introduced to asked, "How is that you don't have any scent?" I tilted my head as I examined the teenager. "It isn't that I don't have a scent. I just rub various plants on my clothing to mask it." Phil snorted in good humor. "Yeah, that is what she keeps telling us. But we couldn't differentiate her scent from the trees when we were traveling. I notice it inside since it stands out, but until now, I haven't been able to pick up any scent to indicate that she is there." Will looked at me in curiosity. "Bruce mentioned that you picked up the scent trails of other rogues. He couldn't smell anything, though." I tilted my head in thought before replying. Their scent was slightly different from the surrounding forest. Rogues use a mixture of plants to keep one from being overly strong and noticeable so. For example, the hint of a willow tree when none are in sight is a deadway. My current scent still has a tang from the cedar trees despite the fact that I haven't seen a cedar tree for 2 days. I have seen lots of oaks around here, but I haven't used them. So my scent is unbalanced compared to the local forest. Phil shook his head as he said, "I would never have thought of that." I looked at him in confusion. "How else will you ever know if a rogue is around you? It isn't uncommon for ferals to roll in leaves and also have a somewhat similar forest scent." Andy glanced at Phil with a somewhat concerned expression. Andy said, "She is right. You know, she was almost in the room before anyone even picked up her scent despite the fact that her scent obviously did not belong in the house, and the open windows couldn't be responsible for that strong of a scent. If a feral did this in the forest where you were running patrol." Phil frowned at that thought and glanced in my direction. "Perhaps, once she settles in, she can help us learn to identify such camouflaged scents." I was still stumped at their inability to notice the differences in such scents. They were wolves, And even mere weeks into life as a teenage rogue, I had managed it. I thought it was a common ability and that the four who escorted me here had been humoring me. I slowly finished my tea while listening to them discuss how they could test out various situations and learn to pick up such scent trails. Emily smiled at us. "Why aren't you and we'll go for a run in wolf shape? He can show you around the nearby forest. And if you find anything amiss, you can let us know." Will looked at me in growing excitement. "Do you want to go for a run? I know we won't be able to mind Link yet, but I would love to see your wolf form." Smiling somewhat shyly, I said, "Sure, as long as you don't mind going slowly. I'm not the fastest thing around." He grinned. "I have no problem traveling slowly. It will give me more time to stare at you." I blushed a bit. No one had ever flirted with me before, so I wasn't too sure how to react. Andy chuckled as he commented, "Don't irritate her, or she might chew on your ankles. I hear her teeth are quite sharp too." Phil elbowed Andy so he would stop talking. It had taken half a day for the bite and scratches on Phil's hand to fade. Will raised an eyebrow in askance. I guess he hadn't heard how they had met me yet. It might be best if he didn't learn about it at the second, though. It wasn't wise to antagonize enforcers, and I wasn't sure how Will would react if he learned that they had chased me through a forest and pinned me. I knew mate Bond was known to cause both wolves to react somewhat unpredictably, and I wasn't sure I wanted to see how an unpredictable enforcer may react. I shook my head as I retorted in a teasing tone. Why would I chew on his ankles when toes are a much more sensitive target? I rose to my feet and looked at Will. I wouldn't mind stretching my legs though. I have been packed around in a basket for the last week. The distraction worked, and he stood up. He was taller than anyone else in the room, but he towered over me. I didn't even come close to his collarbone. I let him take the lead and followed as he led me out of the kitchen. As we exited the pack house, I looked around. This side of the pack house faced the forest, and there was a large expanse of neatly cut lawn and a big pool. I stretched my arms before shifting. I shook out my fur and glanced up at Will. If I thought he was big before, he was absolutely massive compared to my tiny wolf shape. He looked enchanted by my wolf form. He knelt down on the grass as he gazed at me with soft eyes. I walked up to him and put my front paws on his knees. He leaned forward, and I reached up to give his chin a small lick, the equivalent of a shy quick kiss. He smiled as he gently ran his hand along my back, causing sparks to cascade along my spine. He murmured, "Your fur is so soft." Before I realized what he was doing, he managed to scoop me up in his arms as he cuddled me to his chest. He was fast when he wanted to be. I rubbed the top of my head against the underside of his chin as an odd purring sound rumbled in my chest. He gently buried his face in my fur. It felt like I was surrounded by gentle sparks. I listened in contentment to the sound of his heartbeat. After some time like that, I heard his muffled voice as his warm breath ruffled up my fur. "I am not sure I can put you down after this. I could stay like this all day." I chuckled and leaned over to nibble on his fingers. After a bit longer, he raised his head to look at me in amusement. He gently put me back on the ground. He stood up and took a step back before shifting. For a split second, it looked like he was concealed by a heat haze before a dark gray wolf stood in front of me. I blinked in surprise. He was nearly as big as an alpha, although the large size was common among enforcers. It was rare for me to see an enforcer in wolf form and certainly never up close when I was also in wolf form. This was a first for me. I wouldn't say it out loud yet, but he was handsome. I trotted towards him as he watched me with his amber eyes. I wove a figure 8 between his two front paws, leaning lightly against his legs as I walked, enjoying the feeling of the sparks. I was amused to realize that I didn't even come halfway up his legs. I grinned up at him before wagging my tail and darting towards the trees. He immediately followed me. Chapter 10. I glanced back in amusement as I ran under a jungle gym without ducking while I had to detour around it. I wasn't entirely sure he could wiggle his way into the middle of this piece of playground equipment in his wolf form if he tried. He was simply too large for something designed for kids. I may have been running at a good clip, but he was only doing a fast trot to keep up. I slowed down as we neared the trees, and Will took the lead. I followed him up and down various trails as I studied the forest around us. He was doing a fast walk while I trotted along beside him. We entered a small meadow, and I perked my ears at a bush on the other side, although I was worried since I could both scent and sense the approaching sentry. With a rustle, a great-appled wolf emerged. Will was surprised to see him and went forward to greet him. I was unable to hear what they were saying as they were in wolf form. Neither of them were paying attention to me, probably discussing something important from their intense gaze as I looked at each other. After a couple of minutes, I felt kind of awkward and decided to get a drink from a small creek off to the side. The water was clear and refreshing. I started to walk back to Will and the sentry. Out of habit, I rubbed my side along the shrub growing along the bank. I could sense another pack member approaching. It was likely a sentry who had just gotten off shift and was also coming to speak with these two. I paused to face the direction he was coming from. A brown wolf came out of the bushes and paused as he caught sight of me. His ears pinned back as he snarled at me. I froze, stunned at his unexpected reaction. He hadn't been quiet in his approach. Surely he knew that all three of us had heard him coming. It was as if I had been trying to hide. Neither of us had time to do anything before a thundering snarl sounded off to the side and a charcoal gray wolf charged forward to slide into a protective stance in front of me. It was the sentry's turn to freeze in fright. My previously laid-back and cuddly mate had just turned into an enraged beast that was crouched as if to pounce. His back legs were just in front of me, and his loud snarls practically made the air vibrate in their intensity. His hackles were standing straight up, making him look twice as big. As an enforcer, he was normally a force to be reckoned with. The fact that he was protecting his mate only added to his power, considering that he was focused on a member of the pack. This was a bad situation. I took a few careful steps forward as my fur brushed against his back leg. I leaned against his leg, hoping that the contact could calm him down, or at the very least, make him reluctant to pull away in order to attack the brown wolf. Will's stance shifted slightly into a more defensive position instead of an offensive one. I could sense that he was reluctant to charge forward and leave me exposed in the middle of the clearing, although I could feel anger and protective feelings rolling off of him. The brown wolf saw the change and bolted back the way he came. I leaned harder against Will's leg. If he left, I would end up rolling in the dirt. I sighed in relief when Will didn't take off after him. The first sentry also slightly relaxed as the tension eased, although he didn't move from where he had been standing previously. I studied Will's tense from I didn't think he would leave me here to go chasing after a wolf in the forest, but I really needed to distract him better. I leaned over to gently knit the top of his one toe. Will turned his head to look at me incredulously, as if he couldn't believe that I had actually dared to chew on an enforcer's toes. His hackles were slowly flattening now that the immediate danger was over. I yipped lightly at him as I trotted forward and stretched my neck up. He lowered his head, and we gently bumped noses. Having sparks originate from my nose was a bizarre sensation, and I sneezed as a reaction before plopping my rear end on the ground. I perked my ears and tilted my head innocently, gazing up at him with a puppy-like expression. Will heaved a huge sigh as he relaxed more, his control no longer strained. His tense stance faded as he turned so he could more easily face me. I was somewhat surprised when he shifted. He scooped me up and buried his face in my fur. I slowly felt the last of the tension leave him as he used my scent to calm himself down. I reached up to give his neck and the side of his chin a few small licks as reassurance. He lifted his head so he could look at me. Sorry about that. I kind of lost it when he snarled at you. To think that I once thought that other males overreacted when it came to their mate's safety. I was aware that the drive to protect one's mate was so intense. It is much stronger than anything I have ever felt. Even as an enforcer, I looked up at him and perked my ears attentively. I kind of wished we could mind link each other, but that wasn't possible at this moment. I would have to be part of his pack to access the pack link or be fully mated to him to use the mate bond. He gazed at my face, as if committing it to memory. I did apologize to him via the mind link so that he can stop running. He says he is sorry for snarling at you. I wagged my tail, although the way I was held, it beat rapidly between his arm and his chest. He chuckled at me. If you are trying to be cute and distracting, it is working. Wolf grinned in triumph. That hadn't been quite what I was aiming for. But if it worked, who was I to complain? The sentry off to the side spoke up. Having shifted to human at some point,丨Luna made a formal announcement that a grey runt is on our land and will be joining our pack. So we shouldn't have any more misunderstandings. She didn't mention that Will happens to be your newfound mate, because she is hoping that you two can enjoy some time alone before being inundated with wishers. I yipped a thank you at him, and he nodded in response. Will looked down at me. How about we finish our run and do a quick tour of the town? I nodded happily, and he set me down before shifting. He took the lead once more as he guided me down more trails. I tried to commit them to memory. A wolf pack often had more trails close to their pack house than any rabbit warren. I was pretty sure that I would have the ones close to the pack house memorized within the week. I sniffed the air a bit more deeply and slowed. Will noticed my change of speed and also slowed, alternating between looking at me and the surrounding forest. I sniffed a few more times and followed my nose as I tracked the familiar scent. I circled and sniffed the ground carefully as Will watched me in confusion. It took me a few moments to locate it. Then I started digging at the base of a tree. As I got deeper, the smell got stronger, and I went more carefully. Will padded closer to watch what I was doing, still confused and perplexed. Less than a minute later, I had dug a ring down with a black jewel in the middle. I carefully undermined the valuable object until it gently rolled off of its pedestal. I shifted and was kneeling in human form. I carefully picked up the baseball-sized object and turned with a grin to show Will, who was still watching in his massive wolf shape. I explained. Black Truffle. If the pack has a chef around, he or she will be absolutely thrilled. Whenever I brought one into trade with a pack, the pack members practically broke into fights over who got it. Will looked at the lumpy black object dubiously. I grinned at his expression and dug around in my backpack for a collapsible box I carried just for delicate treasures like these. I quickly put the box together and put the truffle inside before returning the box to my backpack. I shifted back to my wolf form. My backpack and all of its contents disappeared and could not be harmed or bounced until I shifted back to my human form. Will shook his head in disbelief as we continued down the trail. Chapter 11. We paused by a stream for a drink. A big log had fallen across the creek, and the way it was propped up against the far bank, it was partially off of the ground. I glanced at Will, who was still drinking, and I quickly scrambled up on top of the log. He raised his head and tilted his head as he gazed at me in curiosity. I was now sitting on the log and was level with his head. I grinned at him. My face had not yet been level with his face in any form. He had been standing beside the log while drinking and hadn't moved yet. I knew I would never win a wrestling match with any wolf, let alone an enforcer, but that didn't stop me from launching myself into a leap to land on his back. I wasn't sure if he even felt the impact of my 15-pound body as I landed on his shoulders. I did know that my toenails would be unable to even reach through the thick fur on his back, let alone scratch him. They did help me hang on as I grabbed a mouthful of fur and tipped side to side playfully. I felt his chuckling laugh underneath me as he flopped down to his stomach. He hit the ground with enough force to dislodge me. I rolled onto the ground and twisted into a playbow with a wildly wagging tail before launching myself at his neck. I could feel his amusement rolling off of him. I could only imagine what someone would have thought of our wildly unequal game. A nearly black wolf the size of a small horse being playfully attacked by a wolf the size of a cat. His head alone was almost as big as I was. Will rolled onto his side as he gently mouthed my neck. I halfway climbed on top of his head to grab onto his ear. He twisted his head to the side and sent me rolling to the side. He rolled back onto his stomach as I charged forward again to try and wrap my forepaws around his muzzle while gently tugging on the loose fur on his cheek. He raised a paw larger than my head and gently used it to pin me to the ground as he grinned at me. A rogue had once taught me how to get out of his particular position. It was a move that only worked for someone as small as a runt. I twisted my body in that special contortion and slid out behind the back of his paw before renewing my assault on the front of his neck. I could feel Will's surprise before his amusement and love overpowered the emotion. With a chuckle, he dropped his head on me, effectively pinning me upside down. I wiggled a bit to the side, pushing against his neck to slide out until my head was lying on his forearm. I lay there on my back, canting in silent laughter. Will lifted his head to examine me as I used his forearm as a pillow. He leaned down and gently licked underneath my chin. I wasn't dirty from rolling around, but he proceeded to wash most of my fur anyways. It tickled. I squirmed and tried to make a break for it, but he used his paw to catch me and drag me towards him to wash my back. I could sense his amusement as he foiled my various escape attempts. He eventually let me go as his tongue rolled out the side of his mouth in silent laughter. I stood up and shook my damp fur to try and straighten it back out. I may have smelled like the forest before, but now all I smelled like was Will. Even my nose couldn't pick up any trace of greenery in my scent. If he had planned to keep my mate's status low on the radar for the next day or so, that had been blown right out of the water. Anyone who came within scenting distance of me would smell him on me with ease. It shouldn't surprise me that an enforcer would ensure that any male who kept their distance as soon as they caught my scent. I narrowed my eyes mischievously at him and skipped backwards a few steps until my feet were in the creek. I swiped hard at the water, sending some water droplets into Will's face. He jerked back in surprise, and I took that as my chance to jump over the tiny creek and make a run for it. I forgot to take his speed as an enforcer into account. Mere seconds later, Will loomed over me and gently grabbed me by the scruff of my neck as he picked me up off the ground mid-stride. He was being gentle, so his hold didn't hurt. He proceeded to show off his speed as the forest blurred by us. He launched over logs and obstacles with ease. Those huge jumps left me slightly scared in a way that the tree highway never had. I had never traveled at such speeds before, and I could tell that he was not going at his top speed either. It had taken us several hours to get out to where we had met the sentry, and we covered the same amount of distance in under 15 minutes. He slowed as he reached the edge of the forest and put me down. Our fast run had dried my fur, although his scent had dried into it. Simply rubbing against a few plants was not going to meet it any either. I shifted forms and stretched before draping an arm over Will's furry neck. It was the easiest since his shoulders were still higher in wolf form than mine were. He leaned lightly against my side, and I ran my one hand through his fur nest and lead as we gazed at the town ahead of us. It was a small place, maybe 8 or 9 small blocks of stores and offices, most of which were very likely small family-owned businesses. It was about average for a pack of this size. Will shifted to his human form and put his arm around my shoulder. We stood there for a bit longer before heading into the town. Chapter 12. I got a lot of looks as we passed people. Most started whispering excitedly with those near them as they noticed Will holding my hand. If I used my senses, I picked up surprise, happiness, and anticipation. A couple were envious, and I did sense 1 or 2 flickers of disapproval. Overall, most were positive emotions. Will started walking with me up and down each street, pointing out each store as he explained what they generally sold or what they did. My eyes were drawn to the library. I didn't read very well or very fast, but I did like trying. I didn't get many chances living as a rogue. It always amazed me at how much information was out there. If one just picked up a book, Will noticed the amount of attention I was giving to the library, and he asked, "Do you want to go in?" I replied, If you don't mind. It has been years since I got the chance to go into a library. Realization crossed his face as he remembered that I had lived as a rogue for who knows how long. He held the door open for me as I walked in. There was a young lady at the desk who smiled at me as she welcomed me. Hello, I'm Cassie. Can I help you find something?" I smiled at her. I'm Jade. I just popped in to take a look around for the moment, but you will be seeing more of me later. She tilted her head as she glanced between me and Will. Her expression brightened. "Oh," she said. You are the newest member in the pack. Welcome. You will enjoy it. And I speak from experience since I only came here a month ago. Everyone is so welcoming in this pack. I smiled at her enthusiasm and welcoming manner. Thank you. And I am glad to hear that. She grinned at me. I am sure that we will get to know one another later on since I spend most of my time here. But in the meantime, don't let me keep you here. With a chuckle, Will said, Oh, I don't mind. I would rather have my mate show interest in visiting a library as opposed to the bar. With humor lacing my voice, I responded, Not much fear of that. Although if I catch you at the bar watching strippers, we will be having words. He grinned at my teasing threat that hinted at my potential jealousy, and I could sense Cassie's amusement as a runt threatened an enforcer. Will shook his head. Such pursuits didn't interest me in the past. At this point, I only have eyes for you. Well, which, well. He apparently knew how to score brownie points. My heart was practically melting as I went to wrap one arm around him in a hug. He wrapped his arms around me and put a small kiss on my forehead. I had never been one for a public display of affection, so the changes I was noticing took me partially by surprise, while part of me was not at all bothered by it. I knew I could blame the mate bond for that one. We parted with grins at each other. Cassie was smiling from behind the front desk. I blushed a bit as Will took my hand once more to lead me to the door and back out to the street. We passed dozens of shops, occasionally glancing inside the windows or open doors, when I stared at a small sign that advertised soft ice cream for 1 second too long. Will dragged me inside to buy me a small ice cream cone. He blocked me when I tried to pay for mine, much to the amusement of the old lady at the cash register. We sat down on a bench outside to enjoy the creamy treat. I hummed in delight as I savored mine. Will was watching me with a soft smile. I assume you are enjoying it. I grinned immensely. He spoke tentatively. When is the last you had ice cream? I could feel his curiosity, as well as his caution in case his words touched a topic I didn't want to speak about. I thought for a few seconds before replying. I think about 6 or 7 years ago when I joined a pack for a short time. He looked stunned. Well, if you don't mind me asking, why did you leave that pack? In a dry tone, I replied, It was the Black River pack when old Doug passed away. He winced. The battles and numerous skirmishes that had occurred between neighboring packs was well known. The alpha, Doug, had passed away with no children and without naming an heir. It was the biggest example in recent history classes as to why alphas had to have an heir lined up at all times. Will said, Sorry to hear that. I shrugged. It doesn't bother me. I left as soon as the funeral was over. I knew what was going to happen, and I also knew that none of the neighboring packs would allow me to join them. I headed north in West days before the first fight broke out. Will was watching me with intent curiosity. I don't want to intrude, but could you tell me about your life? It feels like I found a handful of puzzle pieces, and I really want to see the whole picture. You can ignore the question if it makes you uncomfortable. Quite a few rogues had tragic pasts, and he didn't want open old wounds if that had been the case with me. I licked my ice cream as I contemplated his question. I eventually said, My life wasn't as eventful as most rogues. My original pack and family were wiped out by ferals when I was 12. Some rogues found me shortly afterwards, and I traveled with them for a while. They got adopted into a pack, but that pack didn't want to run, so I kept traveling. I met lots of rogues over the years. Most are actually quite friendly. I nibbled on the ice cream cone before continuing. About 7 years ago, I joined the Black River pack as they needed more help to keep the pack house clean and tidy. I was given an omega position. They were fair to their own Geza, but as a runt, I was the elephant in the room. Apart from the Alpha and Luna, everyone else preferred it when I kept out of sight. I was there for a bit over a year before Doug passed away. With a shrug, I said, I traveled north and west for a couple of years. I eventually settled in the area where Bruce and the others found me. I traded with the nearby pack since the Alpha and Luna there had no problem with me going to their marketplace unescorted. Then I came here, Pretty boring story compared to most rogues. I looked up at him. What about yourself? Will slowly blinked, possibly still absorbing my short explanation. He said, I was born into this pack as an enforcer. That was a bit of a surprise for my family, since there had never been an enforcer in the family before. I had an easy childhood and went into training pretty early. Most enforcers rarely ever pass the pack borders, and I have never set foot over it. We haven't had any big fights, and few ferals ever show up, so me and Evan don't see much action. Evan is the other enforcer here. Your story sounds more exciting than mine. I looked down and nudged my backpack with my toe. Do you happen to have a favorite cook who likes to make fancier dishes? Will nodded and guided me down the street as we finished the last of our ice cream. Chapter 13. We eventually came to another store that had baked treats displayed in the windows. A lady in her mid-30s glanced up as we entered. Ah, Will. It is nice to see you again. Who is your friend? Will grinned as he put an arm around my shoulders and pulled me closer. This is Jade. The lady blinked in shock at his actions before realization dawned on her face. She sent a genuine smile in my direction. Congratulations. You have no idea how glad I am that Will has managed to find his mate. It was normally a big deal if an enforcer found their mate, since it was a rare occurrence. I gently poked Will in the side and he released me. I grinned up at him while I answered the lady. I am pretty glad that I found him too. Will sent a heartwarming smile down at me. I could feel his relief and pride that I was accepting him so easily. It was common for rogues to have some resistance or difficulty when it came to settling down with a newfound mate. Going from a free rogue to being part of the complex pack life was a huge adjustment. I pulled my backpack off of my shoulders and dug out the box. Offering it to her, I said, Here. Although I would appreciate getting the box back. She took the box with a slight frown of confusion before opening it up. Her excited eyes darted to me. How much do you want for this? This is a beautiful truffle and out of season. I shook my head. Nothing. It is yours. Her jaw dropped. Are you sure? This thing is worth a lot. A big truffle out of season was very uncommon and expensive. Truffles like this were actually the reason that I had some money in my backpack. Well, a section I'd like with, if you ever happen to be cooking at the pack house. I would love a refresher course on some of the appliances. I laughed lightly. I looked at the stove they have there, but I haven't used a stove in years, and I have no idea which one of the 50 buttons on that thing actually turns the oven on. They both laughed with me. The lady replied, Well, I will be more than happy to show you anything you want in the kitchen. I have a morning shift there 3 times a week, so feel free to join me. My name is Sylvia. I nodded with a smile. Thank you for the offer. My name is Jade. Sylvia pulled the truffle carefully out of the box to examine it more closely. Where did you find this lovely thing? To the west, not far from where the creek splits. I glanced sideways at Will as another grin tugged at my lips, although you should have seen Will's face when I started digging up that thing. Will shook his head. I fail to see how anything that looks like that can possibly be edible. Sylvia and I grinned at each other in amusement. We visited with Sylvia a while longer before we finished the tour. We headed back to the pack house, which had a lot more people around since it was getting close to supper time. I stuck close to Will's side as we entered the crowded hallway. We went into one of the smaller living rooms just off the main hallway. There were a handful of people in far corner of the room talking, although they didn't seem to notice us. Will had likely known that I would be uneasy in huge crowds after spending so much time alone. I breathed a sigh of relief and realized that Will was oddly silent. I looked up to see that his eyes had a faraway look. I felt his enforcer aura appear and strengthen. He blinked and looked down at me and I have to go break up an overly rowdy group of teenagers. Will you be okay here? I really didn't want him to leave me here in a house full of strangers, but I knew he had responsibilities. I replied, Yes, I will stay here until you come back. I think the main bulk of the people are heading for the dining area anyway. Most probably don't even know that I am in the house. I will give a shout if I need you. He ducked down to plant a kiss on my cheek before disappearing out the door. I slowly blinked as the warmth of his presence faded from the room. I had been beside him most of the day, and his sudden absence was as if the sun had hidden behind the clouds. He had only been gone a few seconds, and I couldn't believe how much I missed him already. I glanced around the room again. When we had come through the house, Will's bulkhead shielded me from sight, and since I smelled like Will, I doubted that anyone had picked up my scent. The 4 people in the room still hadn't turned around or noticed my presence. My omega senses told me that they were truly unaware of me and not simply ignoring me. I walked silently to the side to examine the various pictures on the wall. I recognized the Luna and examined the other pictures. I sensed the change in air when the other 4 realized that they weren't alone in the room. I turned around as I heard footsteps approaching. The 3 guys and 1 girl were around my age and looked curious. One guy held out his hand. "Hi, I'm Tim."
"I don't believe we have met."
I shook his hand. "I'm Jade. I just came in today with Bruce and his group." His face lit up as he asked, "Are you planning on staying long?" I was somewhat shocked at his hopeful look. How did he not pick up Will's scent on me? Or did he just assume that Will had passed by and that I had no scent since I was a rogue? The girl beside him was more observant and snorted faintly. "Tim, use your nose before Will chucks you out of the window." Tim gave her a blank look before taking a deep breath. His eyes went wide as he realized his oversight. Sorry about that. I didn't realize that you had a mate." I accepted his apology. "No worries. No harm done." The girl shook her head at his denseness. "I'm Samantha. And this is John and Mark." John shook my hand. "If you didn't pick it up, Sam is my mate." I said, "Yes, I noticed." I tilted my head as I examined Mark. "And your mate is Cassie from the library." "Right. I met her earlier today. She seems nice." Mark shook his head. "No, I haven't met my mate yet." I quickly apologized. "Sorry about that. My mistake. I rarely made a mistake when assuming that someone was mates with someone else. My mistaken assumption had me ducking my head slightly as my cheeks faintly flushed with my embarrassment. He seemed amused and didn't take any offense at my mistake. "No problem. I kind of wish I had found my mate," I said. "I shouldn't have assumed. My apologies. What do you normally do during the day?" They gave me a rundown of where they worked and what they did. John and Sam owned their own store, while Mark and Tim ran patrol. I glanced at the door with a smile as I sensed Will's approach. His eyes went straight to me as he entered the room. Will wasted no time in closing the distance between us as he came up behind me and wrapped his arms around my shoulders in a hug. I leaned my head back against his chest to gaze up at his amber eyes. He smiled softly at me as he said, "Feel like braving the dining hall. Most of the crowd has already eaten and dispersed." I nodded, and he once more guided me down a hallway. The other 4 tagged along as well. Chapter 14. I laughed at John's story as he described what his class did during their high school graduation ceremony. I shook my head at his antics before taking a drink. Supper was very good. It was rare that I got stuff like this. Ham, mashed potatoes, gravy, veggies, bread, and more. My supper was usually bread and smoked meat. I hadn't been this full in a long time. I raised my eyebrows in surprise as someone put a plate of honey muffins on the table. Their sweet scent made my mouth water. Other than the ice cream this afternoon, the last time I had any sort of sweet or dessert was when I had been an Omega with the Black River pack. By the time I got to the table with that pack, the desserts and good stuff had almost always been consumed. Will had been watching me most of the meal and instantly noticed me. I umped the plate of sticky sweet morsels that were out of my reach. With a chuckle, he reached over to snag one off of the pile and held it up to my mouth. I was a bit self-conscious of 4 people watching in amusement, as Will tried to hand-feed me, but that didn't stop me from leaning forward to take a bite out of the treat. The flavors exploded on my tongue, and I hummed in delight as I enjoyed my mouthful. I turned a bit red as I noticed that Will was watching me with an enrapt expression. Samantha noticed the blush and chuckled before explaining, That is the mate bond at its finest during the courting stage. Anything you show interest in, he will try to get for you. If it is food, you can practically be guaranteed that he will try to feed it to you himself. The mate bond itself will drive him to do it. It will be overly pronounced until the mate bond is completed. Oh, and don't be surprised if your mate gets jealous and overprotective at any given point in time. To complete the mate bond, I would have to be marked and mated. I wasn't ready for that yet, so I expected that the mate bond would get well worked up over something at some point. Sam looked pointedly at John as she finished her little speech. John rolled his eyes, saying, "I was that bad." Mark snorted in disagreement. "No, you were much worse. You growled at anyone who so much as glanced at her. You wouldn't even let me or Tim in the same room with her, even when you were sitting beside her." John grumbled incoherently as he ate his own honey muffin. Will juggled the rest of the muffin so a corner stuck out towards me, and I leaned in for a second bite. It was just as good as the first. I mumbled around my mouthful. I am glad that Will doesn't seem to go overboard in the jealousy area. I had seen quite a few men like that. They were insanely jealous and could barely tolerate watching their mate even shake hands with another guy as a greeting. I had felt the faint stirrings of jealousy when a few other women had walked close during the meal, and I knew the mate bond was responsible for it. It usually tended to affect males worse though. Will looked sheepish as he confessed. "I will admit that I have had to bite my tongue a few times. I am quite grateful for all of the self-control lessons that Tony knocked into me in our training, though they're getting a serious workout." I grinned airily, oddly flattered that he would get jealous over me. The others snickered at his admission in slight sheepishness. He seemed relaxed enough at the moment as he sat beside the two unmated males were at the table and talking with me. I wasn't entirely sure how it would have felt if Samantha wasn't already paired up with John. Will popped the last bit of the muffin into his mouth, which was fine by me since I was quite full at this point. I stretched and leaned back in my chair. "I am stuffed," I said. "Is the food always this good?" Mark nodded. "Yep, you rarely get the same thing 2 days in a row since the cooks take turns." I murmured, "I think I will have to get some lessons from them. This food was excellent." I glanced over my shoulder at the approaching Luna. She was focused on Will and me as she headed our way. Will followed my gaze and grinned at the approaching Luna. He greeted her. "Emily, how is it going?" "Good. We just have to figure out where your mate will sleep tonight. Then my tasks will be complete for the evening." Will and I turned a bit red at the topic, but it was a valid question. Most mates were unable to sleep if they were apart, even if the bond was only partially formed, even if they succeeded in sleeping separately. It made both of them touch IR and noticeably increased the protectiveness and jealousy in the male. Most mates took around 2 weeks to complete the mate bond, and they usually managed to share a room during that time as they got to know one another. Will turned to me, still red. I am hoping you won't mind sleeping in my room. I won't push our relationship any faster than you are willing to go, but I know that I wouldn't be able to sleep without you nearby." I ducked my head shyly. "I usually sleep in wolf form, so as long as you don't troll on me in your sleep, I don't see any problem in it." I wasn't ready to complete the bond yet, but I also knew that I wouldn't be able to sleep without Will close by. Truth be told, I couldn't even remember the last time I had slept in human form. Even as an Omega, I had slept in wolf from under the low bed. Turned out to be a good thing too, since occasionally someone had peeked into my room during the night and had left when they saw the empty bed. Will sighed in relief. "I don't think I could possibly roll on you or harm you." Emily nodded happily. "Good. That makes my life easier. I will leave you to enjoy your evening then." She turned and left the room. I looked up at Will. "What do you usually do in the evenings?" He shrugged. "Evenings are more or less free time for everyone. I normally do some training, but I plan to skip that today in hopes that the mate bond will settle a bit overnight. I would be scared of accidentally hurting someone today." In a bizarre way, I was glad that the mate bond wasn't only messing with my head and mood. Samantha commented, "Take my advice and go somewhere quiet." Will brightened at thought. "That sounds like a good idea to me. I nodded. It worked for me as well. I was used to being around so many people, and I looked forward to finding someplace quieter. We put our dishes in the dishwasher and went outside. We wandered into the forest and down a small trail with no one on it. The familiar smells and sounds of the forest relaxed me. We hadn't gone too far before we arrived at a small waterfall hidden among the trees. Will sat beneath the tree on the thick grass, and I sat beside him. I leaned against his side as he draped his arm over my shoulders. We watched the waterfall in silence as we simply enjoyed one another's company. Our peace was shattered near sunset when a group of kids started playing a game that involved lots of yelling and shrieking not that far away. With a heavy sigh, Will stood up and pulled me to my feet. He commented, "It was nice while it lasted. It is almost sunset anyway, so we might as well head back." We walked back, taking care to avoid the rambunctious kids. I covered my yawn with my free hand, since my other one was holding Will's hand. It had been a long day for me since we had broken camp early this morning, not to mention everything that had happened today. I followed Will as he went up a couple flights of stairs and opened up a door. "This is my room." Well, our room now. I wandered and looked around in curiosity. The walls were a dark brown and the decorations were limited to a few picture frames. It was clean and simple. "This is nice," I said. I was halfway scared to find suede practice clothes draped on a chair or stuffed into a closet. He grinned at my teasing tone. "No, my practice clothing stays in the building by the training grounds. They get washed daily over there. I don't think I could endure the smell of them in here." I grinned in response and hefted my backpack. "Mind if I grab a shower?" He replied, "Go for it. The bathroom is 2 doors down the hallway. There are several bathrooms on every floor, so don't worry about hurrying." He grabbed a set of clothing from his dresser and followed me to the door. "I will be just down the hallway if you need anything." I nodded and went to the nearby bathroom. The hot water in the shower was another luxury that I thoroughly enjoyed. It beat the cold water in the creek by a long shot. I dried off and brushed out my shoulder-length hair. I'd brushed my teeth and everything else since I was in here. The soap and shampoo had mostly removed Will's scent from my skin. For the first time in a long time, my own scent was detectable. I knew from talking with other rogues that Will would have been able to pick up my obscured scent despite how I masked it. It was impossible to mask one's scent from one's mate if they had never met. I shook my head and headed back to Will's room. I somehow arrived before him, but shouldn't have happened since I had lingered in the warm shower. I put my backpack on a chair in the corner and sat on the bed before shifting into my wolf form. I was sure how I hadn't noticed it earlier, that I could sense Will's presence downstairs with his enforced Aurora. He must have gone downstairs to shoo noisy people off to another location where they would not disturb those trying to sleep. An enforcer's role mostly involved peacekeeping things, like removing the potential cause of irritation before anyone even got upset. Of course, if a serious fight or attack ever occurred, they would be in the thick of it. But such things were much rarer than day-to-day squabbles. A quick sniff of the bed told me which side he normally slept on. I curled up on the opposite pillow and wiggled under the blankets for added warmth. Although my head still stuck out, it felt extremely strange to be getting ready to sleep without being in a tight spot. Sleep would be some time in coming like this. I tracked Will with my senses as he began to come back upstairs. He stopped down the hall in a room, probably a bathroom, before coming closer. He entered the room quietly. The PJ bottoms and loose top looked like they had never been worn before. He was probably wearing them to make me more comfortable. He scanned the room until he spotted my gray from half, hidden in the blankets. He turned off the lights and climbed into bed. He rolled over to face me and whispered, "Good night." I stretched my head towards his and placed a small lick on his nose as a goodnight kiss. I yawned and curled up into a ball as I snuggled into the soft blankets. I was surprised when Will's scent and presence allowed me to drift off to sleep almost instantly.